He's been called Mr. Nobody, but Francois Fillon could be France's president next year. He's the Conservative Party's candidate, his likely opponent even further to the right. So where is France heading? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Darine Abougaida. It's been a year of political upsets. Brexit, the FARC referendum in Colombia, Trump, and now France joining the trend. The Conservative Party has chosen former Prime Minister Francois Fillon to be its candidate in next year's presidential election. Now, polls had him trailing for much of the campaign, but Fillon defeated his rival Alain Juppé by a considerable margin. He says he represents change and compares himself to Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. But does he have what it takes to clinch the presidency? Natasha Butler reports from Paris.
As he cast his vote in Paris, Francois Fillon knew he had every chance of winning. But what he could not have predicted was just how big his victory would be. As the results came in, it was a landslide for the 62-year-old former Prime Minister.
La victoire me revient.
I have won once more, and it is a victory that has been built on convictions. For 3 years I've been making my way while listening to the French people, with my agenda, with my values, and little by little I felt this wave that defied all preconceived narratives.
It was a huge achievement for Fillon, who for months had trailed behind his right-wing rivals in the primary contest. He wasn't even expected to get into the top two. Then a shock win in the first round of voting changed everything. Juppé, who had been the favourite, was left playing catch-up. The 71-year-old mayor of Bordeaux was forced to concede defeat.
I end this campaign as I started it, as someone who never compromised on their beliefs.
Fillon is promising radical economic reforms to fix France's high unemployment rate. He takes a hard line on immigration and Islam. He had dismissed Juppé's praise of France's multiculturalism, saying France's identity must be rooted above all in French culture and values. During the day across France, people had turned out in large numbers to vote. Because France's ruling socialists are divided, it's very likely that in next year's presidential elections it will be a contest between the Conservative candidate and the far-right leader Marine Le Pen, and that is something that is on many voters' minds.
I am worried because I am totally convinced that Marine Le Pen is going to be in the second round and she will definitely face a politician from a traditional party.
We need to be careful, very careful. We need to think about what's going to happen now.
After Britain's Brexit vote and Donald Trump's victory in the United States, the National Front leader is hoping to ride a populist wave in France. She has positioned herself as the anti-elite candidate and is likely to portray Fillon as a symbol of the French political establishment. Fillon says he represents change and can beat Le Pen. It'll be up to French voters next year, but there's no doubt after his primary vote, Fillon's confidence will be running high. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
So, as we mentioned, Fillon is no stranger to French politics. He served as prime minister between 2007 and 2012 under President Nicolas Sarkozy, whom he ran against in this primary. Fillon takes a hard stance on labor laws. He wants to end France's famous 35-hour work week and plans to take on the country's powerful trade unions. Fillon also wants to cut public spending, especially on welfare programs and government jobs. He's pledged to reduce immigration into France and says he'll work with Russia to tackle what he calls Islamic extremism. He's also willing to work with Syria's President Bashar al-Assad, which is a significant departure from France's current policy. Let's bring in our guests. In Paris, Renaud Girard, he's chief foreign correspondent for the French newspaper Le Figaro. In Orne, French Senator Nathalie Goulet. And in Berlin, European political analyst Nina Schick. Good to have you with us on Inside Story. Nathalie, so for months, Mr. Fillon was largely dismissed, referred to as Mr. Nobody. What made him win this primary?
No, it's not Mr. Nobody. Nobody, everybody knows him. He was a prime minister. Has been prime minister for 5 years. I mean, he's not Mr. Nobody, but he did a very discreet campaign, in fact, and he just targets the right level of what the people want to listen to. So he had a very successful campaign, and the result is exactly where we can expect it regarding his campaign and the level he put the campaign. Very basic, exactly what the people want to listen to.
And just because I know that you were supporting Alain Juppé, let me ask you what went wrong in his campaign.
Juppé? Well, I think that Juppé put himself like a presidential campaign. He forgot that it was a primary campaign. So he didn't have the right level, I think, and he was too soft, too centrist. For the primary, I think that the most part of the people on the right wing were expecting a stronger campaign, which Fillon delivered.
Renaud Girard in Paris, what does Fillon's rise actually mean? What does it tell you about where France's centre-right stands and where the country's electorate stands in general?
I mean, in his Fillon has got what we call in French a liberal economic plan. Liberal in French means free trade and free market and free entrepreneurs, and so to help entrepreneurship. And so he wants to lower the taxes. He wants to lower the public service. You have like 5.5 million public service workers, fonctionnaires, as we say in French, in France, and he wants to reduce it to 10%. It will still be over the level of Germany, for instance, or even Sweden, and is actually currently attacked at the same time by the left, because he wants to to destroy the 35 hours week. He wants to leave the entrepreneurs to decide how, and the workers to decide together how many hours should be worked during a week. And he's also attacked by the far right. So he is attacked by both sides, because both sides say that he will destroy the welfare state in France. And his answer is that the welfare state in France is bankrupt, and the only way to save it is to follow his treatment, which is a quite tough medical treatment to lower the expenses of France, because as you know, France is the only country in Europe which spends 57% of its wealth in public
Okay, so here's the question. Could he polarize the French people because of his economic plan? Could he divide and polarize France?
There is, since this morning, a very strange attack at the same time by the leftists and by Marine Le Pen as if Francois Fillon was a huge threat against the welfare state, the French socialism, if you like. France is the most socialist country of the European Union, and the right wing and the left are attacking him. I would not say together, because they are not together, but as a fact, they are attacking him. Can he win the election against the two? We have to wait, and we have to see if he can. For instance, for the time being, the polls puts him at, if there were a presidential election first round tomorrow, he would be at 32%. Marine Le Pen would be at 22%, and then Emmanuel Macron and Mélenchon is far left, would be at 13%, and François Hollande, the president, would be only at 8%. We have never had in French history such an unpopular president.
Nina Schick in Berlin, Fillon positioning himself as a staunch defender of French values. He's vowing to restore authority. This is what he's saying: honor the Roman Catholic Church and exert, quote unquote, strict administrative control over Islam. He's also said we've got to reduce immigration to its strict minimum. Is this what is appealing to French voters at this point in time?
Quite clearly, I think so, because he, of course, beat the other candidates who are far more moderate. And I think that this is certainly a feeling that you have in France with the rise of Front National, that the national identity is indeed something that's very important. And you see this across the Western democracies, including in the US, including in France, and indeed in Britain, this idea that we return to national patriotism. And I think that that's unsurprising, given that the situation in France is economically unstable, very high unemployment rate at about 10%, and indeed the security threat. So I think that this is something that has been very appealing about him. Nonetheless, I think it's also very interesting how Front National has taken aim at him as an established member of the political elite, as somebody who's been in power who has been in politics for over 35 years, and they're going to say that he is a candidate of this globalization. And I think that is something that we see across Western politics right now, this anti-globalization sentiment and a return to almost protective nationalism. And I think that is something that Fillon represents.
But how is he any different from Marine Le Pen, Nina? She has said that there would be no place for multiculturalism under her presidency. So, and is he taking away the card that she has to play on?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot of overlap, and certainly when it comes to talking about French national identity, saying that France is not a multicultural society, there's overlap between Fillon and Front National. However, where they are different is on economic policy, because of course Fillon has said that he's going to be more free marketeer, more open. Comparisons have been made to Reagan and Thatcher, although of course he doesn't go as far as them in terms of economic liberalism. And that is where Front National is already taking aim, saying that he's an establishment figure, and that if he comes into power, that we will see the rolling back of the welfare state, which is so loved in France. So I think that is where Front National is already trying to differentiate themselves from Fillon.
And Nathalie Goulet, where does Fillon's win leave prospects for the socialists? Should we discount the socialists at this point?
I really do not. I don't know, but I want to come back to what has been said just now. You cannot compare Fillon with Marine Le Pen or with National Front. I mean, it's really unfair, because he's a Democrat. Whatever was his program and whatever will be his program, you cannot put him on the same level. I mean, it's not admissible. I really would like to underline this point. And he also targeted his campaign on the family, and the opposite of Alain Juppé, who tried to promote happy identity. Fillon just promote the reverse, I mean, against multiculturalism, which was been said. So just to remark that you cannot put them on the same level. I mean, absolutely not.
But a lot of people would in fact disagree with that statement, considering what they both have said about multiculturalism and in France, and some of the comments they have made about Islam in France. If you disagree that you can't compare them, let me ask you this, though. Do you agree, though, that Fillon's win has shifted French politics more rightwards?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, but don't forget it was just a primary. But the fact that he shift on the right wing doesn't make him like a National Front. I mean, there is a margin between them. And especially the policy regarding Europe is totally different. And also, I mean, you cannot say that Fillon is racist, even he dislikes Islam, but he also used this kind of propaganda for the purpose of his primary. You know, when he will have to face a real program, I think we will see in the next months what will happen.
Okay, speaking of Europe, Renaud, Le Pen saying she would hold a referendum on leaving the EU. Fillon seeking to reform Europe from within. So what kind of movements or moves do you expect Fillon to make should he assume the presidency when it comes to the EU?
I think he wants a more efficient European Union. He wants a European Union who can impose, for instance, to China the same trade practices, because like if China is allowed, of course, to export all its goods to Europe, but if you want to export European goods like banking services or insurance services to China, you know that it's very difficult, because actually China does not abide by the rules of the World Organization of Trade Organization. And he wants also a Europe which could resist to the American hegemony in law and finance. I mean, the Americans today want their law to apply also in Europe. Today, Airbus cannot sell 108 Airbus to Iran, though a contract has been signed in the Élysée Palace in Paris, because the French banks are too scared. But what could happen, that they could be sentenced by the American Treasury, because American Treasury consider that American law should apply to French banks doing trade with Iran. So this is very clear. Francois Fillon wants a European Union able to resist to American hegemony. If he thinks that France should be an ally of America, but should not be a vassal, should not be a servant of America. So this is a very big thing for Fillon, a Europe that is able to protect its citizens in the globalization. And also he has a program that he would like to bring back Russia into the European family.
Speaking of Russia, Nina,
sanctions, for instance.
Speaking of Russia, Nina, a lot of people are saying that Fillon is in fact reminiscent of Donald Trump in one way, and that is he is friendlier towards Russia and the president there, Vladimir Putin. In fact, French news media writing several times about the relationship, the close relationship between Fillon and Putin. So do you expect him to get in line with Putin, get closer to Putin, and hence get closer to Putin when it comes to his Syria policy?
Well, obviously France has a strong economic link with Russia, and that was something that was also apparent when the invasion of Ukraine happened, and France was one of the countries that was foot-dragging on those EU sanctions. Now, the interesting thing, I think, is that Europe's approach to Russia as a whole is going to be weakened by the fact that Donald Trump has been elected. And because the US was pushing Europe at the time to really go for these economic sanctions, and Germany got on board, the Baltic states, they obviously are very scared of Russia because of history. They were also pushing for that strong line, but now that Donald Trump has been more conciliatory or ambiguous towards Russia, I think that makes it more difficult for the EU as a whole to have a strong, hard line on Russia. And whether or not those economic sanctions get renewed, if Francois Fillon was to win, remains to be seen. And I think that the Baltic states and the Central and Eastern European states, they're going to be very upset about this, and this is going to be a stark dividing line in the EU going forward.
And speaking of the other European countries, Nina, let me just ask you this. We know that there has been a shift towards the far right in several European countries, including Austria, France, as we're discussing, the Netherlands. If Norbert Hofer wins in Austria, as you may know, next week, then he will become the EU's first far-right head of state. And he's popular. He's campaigned on a largely anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant stance. So seeing as Europe is shifting to the right in general, I want to ask you how much further it's going to go.
Well, indeed, I think Europe is being swept by a populist movement, and not only on the far right, but even on the far left. And this is apparent in the southern European countries, or in countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece. You have leaders on the left. However, the thing that the populist movements on the right have in common is that they're very skeptical of the EU. They're very, very empowered by the fact that we had this migrant crisis. With the UK on its way out, I think that basically what it means is that the EU is going to be on firefighting mode, and the countries like France and Germany, who are so integral to the European project and were always pushing for more European integration, well, they simply find that they're in a position where they can't move the project forward. I think one other interesting factor in all of this is that Germany, even though we also have a far-right movement here, and they will probably get into the Bundestag for the first time next year, Merkel will still remain chancellor. Now, I think she will be seen as a liberal leader for moderate democracy, whereas many of her allies, including the shift in politics in France, will move to the right, and that makes any kind of intra-European cooperation far more difficult. And this on the eve of Brexit, and with the rise of Donald Trump, I think European politics in the next year is simply going to get a lot messier.
And Natalie, do you agree with that? European politics getting a lot messier over the next year?
I think so, but I also think that we will see a big difference between the program of the primary and the real program for the presidential election. For example, Europe was used by Francois Fillon to promote his policy regarding the farmer, too much regulation and a better regulation and less regulation from Europe. Regarding Russia, it's also the fact that we have this food embargo, which is really heavy for the farmers and the rural area, which voted massively for Fillon. So I think I'm absolutely agree with what has been said, yes.
And Natalie, what the country has been through the past 12 months, of course, we remember the attacks that took place in Paris as well as the attack that took place in Nice. So how much has that contributed to that shift towards the right?
Oh, tremendously. You know, nobody right now in France wants to listen a rational speech regarding Islam. Everybody is scared. Everybody is against communitarism. Everybody wants to reduce the number of the imam, or check on them and organize Islam. And we use a lot secularism, regulation, and everything is mixed with the migrants and with terrorism. So it's really not the right time now to speak from a rational point of view. And I think that cost a lot of ballot to Alain Juppé. This happy identity with a rational speech about Islam, I think he lost a lot of ballot because of that.
Renaud, we need to address the timing of next year's presidential elections, because earlier this month, the French President Francois Hollande said that he wants to extend the state of emergency. We know that France is already under a state of emergency. So how does the state of emergency influence elections?
I think it's a big name, state of an emergency, but you don't see any difference in Paris. Just, you know, like people search you when you enter like public buildings, but like they do also in London or in Washington.
But there must be a bit of a difference when Human Rights Watch comes out and says that France's decision to extend a state of emergency for 6 months, this was back in June, undermines human rights and the rule of law. So there must be some difference being felt.
Personally, I do not see it. I mean, you still have demonstrations, so the right of demonstration is not abolished in France. So maybe you have small differences in the procedures of the police. Maybe the police, if they attack a man suspected of terrorism, can keep him in jail like without going to see a judge longer time or things like that. But it's really something that you cannot feel in France.
So what you're saying is the state of emergency does not influence the state of
like
the
in the
elections?
movies of the 70s sorry?
What you're saying is the state of emergency does not influence the mood of elections?
No, I don't think that it will influence the
Okay, and just for the sake of time, let me ask you, if it comes down to a Fillon versus Le Pen contest, who will be the next president, Renaud?
No, I think that, you know, Fillon is much more likely to be the president because really Marine Le Pen is a little bit isolated on the far right. She doesn't have any ally, but Fillon, in the past, for instance, was allied with people from the center. So I think that, but everything can be expected because you still have to wait for the primary of the left, and you have to wait for this young star, rising star, which is a very young former economy minister, Emmanuel Macron. Okay, now he's rating in the polls 13%, but you cannot exclude a surge of Emmanuel Macron. You cannot exclude that is going to grow until 20, 25, 30%, because you have to remember that Francois Fillon, who gathered more than 2/3 of the right-wing electorate, which is a huge success yesterday, 2 months ago, in ratings, it was under 10% of the voters of the right wing.
On that note, thank you very much for joining us, Renaud, Gérard, Nathalie Goulet, and Nina Schick. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. You can see this program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From myself and the whole team here in Doha, goodbye for now.